Welcome, everyone, to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Jannik Sinner is champion in Shanghai. He tacks on title number 7 in 2024. Plays Novak Djokovic in the final, their first meeting since the Australian Open semifinal way back in January. Sinner wins this one as well in straight sets, 7-6, 6-3 for Jannik. Plenty to get into. We will break down this match, but I'll begin with some of the overarching takeaways, 30,000-foot view. For Sinner, obviously, there's no major narrative shift here, just a continuation of hard court dominance that we've seen from start to finish since last year's U.S. Open. I was going to say this calendar year, but you could back it up even further than that. He's reached the final at his last 4 events, going back to Cincinnati. He has won 3 of them. I suppose you could say it's impressive that coming off of the Beijing final loss against Alcaraz, that he kind of showed that there was no damage to his psyche to, turn around and go on another title run right away. I can't say that I'm surprised by that, but I suppose that is one of the notes that you may take away from this week for Sinner. And another is that he's locked up year-end number 1. No surprise, but I think the fact that he's done it this early, normally it at least takes players until Paris-Bercy in order to get year-end number 1. It highlights what a dominant year it's been for Jannik. Again, it's title number 7. And it pushes that win percentage up to 92%. As for Novak Djokovic, the finalist, surpassed my expectations here in Shanghai. I didn't know what to expect, just given some of the comments that he's made, particularly at Davis Cup, about his motivation at the moment, and even going as far as being non-committal about how many events he's going to play in this post-US Open stretch, if he has any interest in the year-end championship in Turin. Not to mention we hadn't really seen any proof of a high level from Djokovic since the Olympic gold in Paris. Obviously, you're only really looking at the U.S. Open as it pertains to that, but there wasn't much to go off of. Novak played great. His serve was deadly. His forehand down the line was a real standout all week long. Thought the draw was kind to him early. Wasn't really sure how the Mensik and the Fritz matches were going to play out. But Novak turned in some really good performances. I thought especially against Taylor, he was very willing to defend. He was difficult to play in long rallies. He was difficult to hit through for Taylor. He came up with some very athletic highlights, particularly some of the passing shots he came up with on the stretch. So those were all good signs for Novak, but I think certainly it seemingly took a lot out of him, because in this final, the first set was excellent quality. It was a continuation of the extremely high level of serving that we saw from Novak throughout. His serve was absolutely dominant throughout the first set. Sinner's serve was very good as well, especially the way he was backing up his serve with the early firepower and the +1 clinicality from Jannik. They go to a tiebreak in the opening set. We'll get into that in detail in the analysis, but then Novak totally fell off in the second set. I thought there was a massive dip from Djokovic, and I think the most likely explanation there is that he was tired from all the tennis he had played throughout the week, and obviously, in an ideal world, Djokovic would be able, especially in these quick conditions, would be fine physically come the final. But I think if you look at the overall circumstance, we'll talk about that as well. It's not a massive shock that Djokovic seemed to be a little bit gassed at that point in time. And Sinner took advantage with an excellent performance. Now, it felt like a pretty regulation Sinner win. He didn't need to be outstanding in this match, and that might feel or sound like I'm downplaying Jannik and what he accomplished here. it's actually the complete opposite. I think that's how you know a player is great. That's how you know a player is elite, when they're winning Masters 1000 titles. And I know it's not the first time that I've said this about Sinner this year. And you leave thinking, yeah, you know, he played kind of normal. He was average for what he normally does. And I think that's what Sinner was in this final. He didn't really need to do a lot out of the ordinary from what he normally does. But his ordinary, his average just happens to be really, really, really good. And it has been all year. Before I continue the analysis, I want to tell you guys about the sponsor of today's video, which really all comes down to habits. Now, some of us have some bad habits on the tennis court. Do you decelerate every time you have to hit a second serve on a big point? That would be a bad habit on the tennis court. Off the court, some of those bad habits can be a little bit more serious, and our sponsor, Fume, is all about kicking those bad habits and starting a movement towards better ones. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that helps people fill the void, ditching a bad habit that you can leave, but with Fume, you still have something to reach for. Fume is not a vape. There's no vapor, so you can use it anywhere. There's no nicotine, so it's not addictive. The flavors are non-toxic. It's a guilt-free alternative, and there's no batteries, so you'll never need to charge it. The build quality is great. It's got some weight to it. It's made from good materials. It's intentionally designed to be fun to fidget with. I mean, listen to this. Hey, that's a great sound. Who doesn't want to hear that sound? There are tons of different flavors. Some are very traditional, like this crisp mint. Others are more out there, like sparkling grapefruit, for example. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and if this is something you need, I want you to be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code Gill Gross to get your free topper. It's the perfect accessory to your Fume device. Slip it onto the mouthpiece for a softer, warmer feel. Head to tryfume.com, that is tryfum.com, and use the code Gill Gross or scan the QR code on the screen to get your free topper when you order your Journey Pack today. I think one of the major headlines tactically, and this is where I'll start, is Djokovic having no answer for Sinner's serve. And this goes back now to their Australian Open meeting, when Djokovic didn't generate any break chances. And that was a big talking point coming out of that semifinal match, where it was universally agreed upon that Novak was just far below his standards in that one. But here in this rematch, no break points again. So that's 6 sets in a row. It was a 4-set match in Australia. Djokovic won the third in a tiebreak without breaking Jannik in Melbourne. And then the 2 sets that they played in Shanghai, no break points again. That's 6 sets in a row. The moment that stood out for me, before we get into the larger picture themes of all of this, the moment that stood out to me was 4-5 love 30. And this was probably Novak's best chance to, I don't know if I want to say win the final, right? Because it was still the first set. But if there was a moment that you look at for Novak where it seemed like he had the upper hand in the match, this was it. Jannik serving at 4-5 love 30. And you're thinking, surely in this moment, Novak is at least going to be able to generate a set point, which would have been a break point as well. Love 30, Sinner, slider out wide, gets the service winner. It was a good serve, but it wasn't unplayable. Novak was... he was on it. He tried to drive it. He was a little bit out in front. He caught it early, and he buried it into the net. 15-30, ad side, Sinner goes T. Djokovic, stretch block return in the net. I thought he was a little slow moving to this return, and he wasn't able to get anything on it, and it kind of died into the net. At 30-all, Novak came up with a good return. This was too good from Sinner. Jannik came up with an outstanding forehand from the middle of the court that set up an overhead, and he won the point with it. So at 30-all, I thought Djokovic didn't do anything wrong, and Sinner was just outstanding. At 40-30, at this point, it's no longer a high leverage situation necessarily, but it's another service winner. This time, Sinner goes wide on the ad side. and it looked like Novak was more so beaten for pace on this serve. This was another really good serve by Jannik. Stretch block return by Djokovic went way long. These are good serves from Sinner. So there are two parts to this. One, Sinner with his back against the wall, he makes 4 first serves in a row. And by the way, his first serve percentage overall wasn't particularly high coming into this stretch of points. So the fact that he's able to flip the switch and step it up there is certainly meaningful. End of the match, 61% first serves in, actually the lowest he was all tournament long, just a note. At the same time, even though Sinner hit really good serves here, we're talking about Djokovic. We are talking about Novak Djokovic. We all know what he's done throughout his career in these spots, particularly at the end of a set, returning at 4-5 love 30. You better hit the best serve that you can possibly hit. You better hit an ace or that ball's coming back in the court. If you're looking at prime Djokovic, that's the equation. He's a total human backboard, especially on the first serve return when he was in his prime, right? So, what is it there? Like, why doesn't he come up with these returns? It could be a reaction time thing. There is so much science out there about the decline in reaction time as somebody ages. There's been a lot of research, a lot of science. It's a well-traversed ground. Part of that is because of, I think, traffic accidents going up as people age. Now, it's a very different thing if you're looking at, when you're approaching 40 years old versus you're an elderly person. So I don't mean to equate the two. But all I'm saying is the science is out there, very much so. And it's a pretty significant talking point when it comes to goaltenders in hockey. There's probably no position in all of sports that is more reflex dependent than NHL or hockey, ice hockey goaltenders. And we see a decline sometimes there. Now, again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but the reaction time thing is real. It's science. So you throw that out there as just something to think about when you look at Novak's returning, sort of taking a dip here. Then the other thing is, and I've said this before, but I think stretch returns, making stretch returns, it's very underrated how explosive and agile that movement actually is. And Novak just doesn't look quite the same when he's exploding into these stretch returns, where it used to be one of the things that is probably one of the most awe-inspiring things that Novak did on a court was just how, I don't know, like, he was like how springy and agile he was when he was returning serve. And obviously he's got a lot of length as well. So I just want to make the point overall, and you look at that spot, 4-5 love 30, the great serving by Sinner, yes, but also Djokovic, he's not the same in that spot as far as his ability to make returns. No doubt about it. Overall, for the match, Sinner, 44% unreturned first serves. That is not a catastrophic number for Djokovic, particularly with how quick the Shanghai courts are playing. Novak, who I've already mentioned served great in this match, he had 58% first serves unreturned. Just to give you an idea. So Novak's first serve, he got more cheap points. He got an impeccable number of free points, which is why I think that despite Sinner getting 3 unreturned serves in that high leverage spot at the end of the first set, I think for the most part, that's not what really stood out to me compared to Djokovic's struggles on the fourth shot. That's where I thought Sinner was much better than Novak. Much better. You see on first serve points, and they're not all the same, okay? But how often is it your first 2 shots as a returner are neutralizations? And oftentimes, you're going to have to make a really good defensive play on your return and then on your fourth shot. And I felt even when Djokovic was making the block return or the stretch return, that didn't quite get him to neutral, and Sinner had time on the +1, Djokovic really struggled to neutralize on the fourth shot. Sinner had, when Sinner had a good +1 look, with ample time, in good position on balance, Djokovic wasn't getting back in these points. It was mostly over. And I just thought the court coverage wasn't quite there. Neither was the balance. And that's mainly where I felt Sinner was better. Using his athleticism to survive the early firepower. Now, often, Djokovic's serve was too good. Nothing Jannik can do. A lot of unreturned first serves. But when Sinner was making the return, there were far more occasions where his legs were getting him back in the points. You can look at the break point in the second set. This was the only break in the match. What was that? That was a fourth shot. Good wide serve by Djokovic, V-attack with the forehand cross-court into the open court, and Sinner just makes a play with his legs. He's on the dead run here, and he decides to go big on the forehand down the line counter. Maybe if he missed it, you could have questioned the shot selection. Of course, we won't because he made it. And it's probably the best shot he hit in the match. But ultimately, it's an example of Jannik is getting attacked on the +1, and he's able to make a play with his legs. And that's so important in winning first serve return points. Rarely, against a good server, when you're in Shanghai, in these quick conditions, rarely are you going to get to neutral on your return of serve. You're usually going to be in trouble, in some sort of trouble, on that fourth shot. Can you dig yourself out of that trouble? There was a gap there. I also think it's worth looking at the first set tiebreak, because it was Sinner. Sinner was the one who played very Djokovician. What does that mean? Two words come to mind: simple and solid. Jannik stayed back on every point. He didn't hit any drop shots. He made every single return in the court. He made only one unforced error, and it was a borderline unforced error. You could make the argument that it was forced because Djokovic got great depth on a cross-court forehand, but I still think it was unforced. So only one mistake. Kept it very simple, very clean, returns in play. Now, that's not to say that he didn't bring some aggression to the table. There were some well-executed attacks down the line, but he was selective about when he attempted those down-the-line attacks. They were both smart. He did get some help from his serve. He hit a couple of unreturned. And every time Novak came forward, which he did quite a bit, as we'll get to in this first set tiebreak, Sinner made him volley. Jannik actually went into safe targets on multiple occasions on these passing shots. He wasn't going to try to do anything spectacular. He wasn't trying to paint the sideline. He was going low. He was going middle. He was making Djokovic volley, and that ended up being crucial because Novak was oddly desperate to come forward in this tiebreak. He served and volleyed on the first point. Wide serve, Sinner, good forehand return, Djokovic, low forehand volley, floated it into the open court. And there was a lot of ground to cover for Sinner. He had to go sideline to sideline, but there was plenty of time for him to get there. He got there in plenty of time. He had a backhand down the line pass, which I thought was pretty routine for him. Djokovic was serve and volleying again on his next serve point at love 3, but he missed the first serve. And on the second serve point, he ended up making a neutral forehand unforced error. He was serving volleying again at love 4. He actually hit a big second serve and won the point. At 2-5, he had a really big advantage in this point. He came in behind some big forehands. He finished a nice little forehand drop volley. He had a lot of time off of a pretty slow, I'd call it a defensive pass by Sinner. He got it low, but there was a lot of time for Djokovic to watch that ball coming in, and it made the volley a lot easier. So that was a good execution coming forward. But the difference is he was able to build up the pressure with the quality of his forehand, and that created a much easier opportunity to come in on his own terms. At 3-5, Sinner came up with a really kind of low, short return, and Djokovic was pretty much forced to hit an approach shot here. Weren't really a lot of options. The approach shot was fine. Sinner went up the middle on the passing shot, and Novak made a mistake on his volley. Backhand volley that he should have made. He put it in the net. That made it 3-6. I can't fault any of Djokovic's decision here, just lacking the execution on the volley. Sinner closed it out at 6-4 with the service winner out wide. Novak missing another makeable block return, and that is how the tiebreak went down. So it was really about Djokovic coming up empty-handed a couple of times. When he came forward at the net, he made a neutral forehand unforced error, and Sinner did all of those things so well that I outlined to start. But I do find it interesting, and I think it's worth discussing a little bit further. You know, what did it say that Djokovic tried to serve and volley on his first 3 points of the first set tiebreak when he hadn't served and volleyed all match long until the start of the first set tiebreak? Because that's not the classic tiebreak Djokovic. It's not the Djokovic of old. Was he trying to surprise Sinner? That's possible. Look, he's got a lot of confidence in the quality of both his serve and his volleys, and it can be a really good play for Novak. I think it's really hard to serve and volley against Jannik Sinner because he doesn't give up that much ground on his return of serve. He does a really good job of hitting over his return, not floating it. But nonetheless, he could have been trying to surprise Sinner. But isn't that in itself a little bit of an admission? If you feel like you have to surprise your opponent by kind of pulling out this oddball tactic out of left field, it's a little bit of a statement of insecurity, in my opinion. Now, it might have not been a surprise. It might have been brought about by a level of fatigue that was setting in. And that is possible. Because in the second set, the physical gap widened. The ball striking went downhill for Djokovic. There were a lot more errors. There were moments of sluggish footwork, and there were moments in which the decision-making suggested that Djokovic kind of was looking for an out. And by the way, I thought against Fritz it was the opposite, that Novak was really willing to hang in there and fight for the hard yards, so to speak. In other words, I felt he was very much willing to defend, very much willing to work the point, and kind of match Fritz in these physical baseline rallies and participate in them with a level of commitment. Didn't really see a lot of that in the second set here. And I just point out that Djokovic hadn't played more than 3 matches in a week since the Olympics. I mean, in what world would his body be used to that? What he had to do here in Shanghai. He has not put his body through those paces. So it comes down to, I mean, when it comes to fitness, it comes down to hard training and match toughness. And coming in, there are some questions in both areas when it comes to Novak. When it comes to the training, it's just about how rigorous is the fitness regimen right now from a guy who continues to say that he will be emphasizing the majors. And there's no major ahead at the moment. And in terms of the match toughness, that one is much easier to quantify We can simply look at what Novak has done in the last few months, and we can discern that there hasn't been a lot of match play, which is going to negatively affect his fitness. So yeah, there were some fatigued-looking misses. There was a clear level drop, and Novak's body language was pretty flat again. I don't really recall seeing even a fist pump from Djokovic in this final. Sinner was right there. He was rock solid. You know, he maintained his focus. He was hitting really big off the ground without missing very much. Again, I mean, it was a very classic and everything you would expect out of the world number one. All right, I do have more to break down in the notebook dump, but first a reminder that Monday Match Analysis is powered by BetUS. BetUS offers 24/7 customer service and the fastest payouts in the industry. Currently, new customers can go to betus.com and use the promo code YouTube150 for an 150% deposit bonus up to $2,000. Please gamble responsibly and don't harass the players. First item in the notebook dump. Sinner for the tournament, 14 for 16, break points saved. He leads the ATP in service points won in 2024, 70.7%. He leads the tour in break points saved percentage as well, 72.9%. So in some ways, statistically, it should be expected that the player who is best at winning service points is also the best at saving break points. But it is not the norm necessarily to, first of all, that isn't always the case. And second, it is difficult to win a higher percentage of service points when facing break point. And we talked about this in the mailbag last week, and it was pointed out to me. I'm very happy to follow up on this. It was pointed out to me that perhaps the reason why everyone in the big three, plus Medvedev and Zverev and Sinner, all of these players for their career go downhill in their points won percentage when facing break point versus just a regular service point. And I thought, wow, that's actually pretty interesting. And I suggested the theory that it's because when a returner has break point, they are always fully engaged and invested in the outcome of that point, whereas 40 love, 40-15, sometimes you get a lower effort level from the returner. And I suggested that was kind of the reason. It was pointed out in the comments by many, and these people are absolutely correct. The fact that when the level of opponent is higher, you are more likely to face break points. When the level of opponent is lower, you're less likely to even face break points, but obviously you're going to continue to win service points. And that might describe the statistical disparity that we see, where even the greatest of all time get worse when facing break point. All right? But Jannik Sinner was the outlier. Jannik Sinner had a 0% difference. And I don't know about the rounding or the decimal places or any of that, but Sinner for his career had a 0% difference when facing break point versus a normal service point. And he was the only player who could say that. But this year takes it a step further because he is about 2 percentage points better when he faces a break point. What is Sinner's favorite shot? This is the second item of the notebook dump. So much of what makes Jannik great right now is the fact that there's a well-roundedness, that there aren't really a lot of holes. Very even off of both wings. And you wouldn't say it's clearly the serve, or he loves his drop shot, or he loves his volleys, or you know, it's not really like Sinner doesn't have, I wouldn't say, a universally accepted signature shot. And that's why I posed this question. What's his favorite shot? What's his best shot? And that's something interesting, I think, to think about. He posted insane numbers on his runaround forehands for this tournament. This is courtesy of Tennis Insights, and I'll flash this graphic up on the screen. The light blue number is for Shanghai. The black numbers, the numbers highlighted in black, are the 52-week average. I'll just draw your attention to two things. First being, he did not miss an inside-out forehand in Shanghai. He did not miss one. His in percentage was 100%. And he did so, averaging 84 miles per hour, which is 3 miles per hour above his average for the year. But more generally, it is just an outstanding average speed on the forehand. That's the inside out. You look at the inside in. He made 96% of his forehands inside in for Shanghai, but his accuracy, 59% were within 1 meter of the sideline. So he is dropping dimes and he's not missing his inside in forehand. And one of the things that's really stood out, I think, more so than before, maybe in Cincinnati, but I didn't notice it, certainly at the US Open and here in Shanghai, is that when Sinner is running around and hitting forehands from the ad side, you are in serious, serious trouble. Last item in the notebook dump, just have to mention this. And anybody who watched the match, this is probably one of the things that they'll remember about it. Roger Federer, Carlos Alcaraz, and Juan Carlos Ferrero were sitting shoulder to shoulder to shoulder, taking in this final. I thought one of the coolest things about Shanghai, and I don't know exactly how they've situated the setup that has made it so attractive for players to just pop in and watch these matches on center court, but obviously the locker room is situated in a way that makes it very easy for players to sit out there and watch without necessarily having to deal with other fans or involving security or any of that stuff, which would be the case at most tournaments. But it really does improve the product when it gives it a bigger feel. And I think one thing that post-US Open tennis could always use is a bigger feel. And I thought it added to the gravitas of the match that all three of these guys were watching together. I was like, of course, fantasizing about being a fly on the wall, and would have loved to have heard some of that conversation. But another thing that was kind of wild to me was the proximity that they were sitting to Sinner's box, and it almost looked like, first of all, anything that Simone Vagnozzi was saying could have been picked up by Alcaraz and JC Ferrero, more importantly, but I suppose also Roger. But then also maybe vice versa. Like they were just all very, very close. And it made for interesting scenes. Could you imagine that in other sports, though? Goes back to kind of the uniqueness of tennis. I mean, to me, this was the equivalent of the Lakers are playing the Celtics in the NBA Finals, and the Knicks are sitting courtside next to the bench. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but the closeness of it all was interesting, and I don't know. I'm curious to see. Like Alcaraz obviously lost a few days ago, and he's just sticking around in Shanghai. Next stop is the Six King Slam exhibition, which I know is in Saudi Arabia, but I don't know if it's in Riyadh or specifically where in Saudi Arabia it is. But are they going to fly together again? Alcaraz and Sinner, because at this point it's like they're on tour together. In Beijing, they chartered out the same private jet to make the trip to Shanghai. So I'm curious to see if they'll do that again. Needed to mention that because it was part of the spectacle that was Sinner over Djokovic in the Shanghai final. But I will leave it at that. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.